sense that he wants to hear your views, he wants to answer your questions, and we've set down 2 hours, and we are very happy to make sure every single person in the room has a chance to ask a question. But the way we're going to do it is, first up, I'm going to ask Jim some questions so you know where the review team's at, whether any decisions have been made, and we will actually even go through the 4 options that were outlined in the green paper before then opening up to you to talk about each of the options or ask about anything else that's on your mind. Does that sound okay? Thank you. So let me start. Welcome. Lovely day to put on in Townsville, isn't it? Beautiful weather. And a gorgeous hotel. Can I just check your microphone's on?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let me start by asking you about your specific brief and whether there will be definitely a change from the status quo or not.
Well, my specific brief, which is in the attachment to the green paper in the terms of reference, is to...
Hold it up like this.
My specific brief, how about that? Can you all hear? My specific brief, which is in the green paper in your attachment, and if you haven't got one, there are copies at the back there for you, is to look through where the taxi industry is with respect to disruptive technology, such as Uber. And can I just emphasize that this is not an Uber review, this is a review about the taxi industry and disruptive technology. There are other companies such as Lyft, and a number of others, GoCatch, that are in place. So where we're at now is our review has reached a point where we've completed the guiding principles, which we launched with you, the innovation paper, feedback here, and Benjamin here is from the Taxi Council has provided some excellent information, which I'm appreciative of, Benjamin. And we've now come up, based on that evidence, based on the consultation, we've come up with 4 scenarios, all of which have merit, and our final paper will go to Cabinet in July, and that's what's called the white paper. In that paper, we'll be going through all these options and the feedback, and it is my expectation that we may be in a position to go to government with what I call a workable approach or solution.
Okay, so the green paper came out, and I have seen some reaction to that in the press, some for, some against. Can you just give us an idea of how you will go about deciding, given there will not be consensus, I suspect?
How do I go deciding the
final proposal to Cabinet?
Okay, well, let me put it this way. I think in each of the scenarios that you have in front of you, there are 4 of them. Each of them also have a social and economic perspective. We are going through those economic modelling as we're speaking today, and we're also going to take your feedback back, check it out, and then at the end of that, Madonna, I'd expect to be in a position to say, look, I think either scenario X or Y would be worth government giving serious consideration to.
Okay, and then the government will make the final decision.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, this review is a recommendations to government. Government is the final arbiter, and government will make the decision.
And this is not a department review. You have been brought in as an independent review team.
That is correct. I am, as you know, this is a part-time role for me. I've also worked with a number of different areas, including Springfield Land Corporation. I agreed to accept this assignment as an independent chair. My panel members also include Julianne Schaefer, who is also independent, she's also part-time, and Professor Merrick, who is also part-time from QUT.
We talk about taxis and ride sharing, but limousines and customers with disabilities also feature strongly. How are they going to be netted in this review?
Well, in the green paper that we have released, we have covered limousines, and we also have covered the disability sector and the issues associated there. And there's some very significant issues from how TSS would operate, what would happen if certain scenarios came into place, how would you ensure that, for example, the wheelchair access taxis are available when they need to be available, and that is an important consideration for us.
You mentioned the word scenarios, and one of the scenarios, and we'll go through each of those in just a moment, one of the scenarios, you treat southeast Queensland one way and the rest of Queensland, including Townsville, Cairns, everything north of the southeast of the state, in an entirely different way. Can I ask you why you came up with that rationale, and what has been your specific feedback since the Green Paper's been released on that?
Well, the reason we came up with that scenario is precisely from sessions like this, where we have listened to what our stakeholders in regional Queensland have been saying, and there are two key features that stood out for me. One is that the taxi services in regional Queensland is more than just a taxi service, it's also a community service. It's a very critical part of the community. If you were to legalise right sourcing, the very viability of that industry could be under threat. So the view that we took in scenario 2 was that if you did look at legalising right sourcing, it would be good to consider an option where regional Queensland was quarantined from it. And that's the reason that's been put in that our consultation, I'll look at the Mackay, for example, has got a 25% downturn at the moment with the taxis, and that's not even with any Uber presence or other Go Catch or so on. You've got similar significant downturns here in Townsville, in Rockhampton. I think Cairns is the only one where you've got a 1% growth factor, but even in Cairns, if you were to introduce source writing, it could cause a significant impact on the local economy of the viability of that industry.
I've got a couple of questions on that scenario when we go through the scenarios about whether it's recommended for a period and it could change. But let me just go on to the broader picture for a couple more questions. You keep referring to guiding principles, and I just want you to explain what they are, and are you measuring the 4 options against those guiding principles to make your decision?
Yes, every option that's in there, every scenario that's in there is being assessed against the 5 guiding principles. So very quickly, they are first of all accessibility, and accessibility is pretty important. And in the Green Paper, you will see that we have outlined accessibility. It should be available 24/7. It should be available when it's needed, but it also should be accountable. That is, we should be able to make that service accountable, and that's why you have legislation and you have a regulator. It should also be customer focused. Customers vote with their feet, as we've seen, and it's very important to keep that customer focus in place. And it also should be innovative, and that is that the encouragement taking customer first will drive innovation further, so we see innovation as being very important. And finally, it should be safe. Safety is extremely important, and when you look at the history of the taxi industry in Queensland, it's got an excellent safety record. 1994, even when core regulation was introduced, safety is still a hallmark. I've said in the Green Paper that under the existing scenario, we believe the taxi industry satisfactorily met the guiding principles, but we felt that the customer end and the innovation end could do with a lot more effort and a lot more focus.
How that might be the case, I'll come back to. But this label digital disruption is everywhere, and people are saying it's affecting and changing and transforming every industry. In your review, is there another industry that you think mirrors the taxi industry in some ways that could give us a look into the future?
Well, I think I've used this term, the sharing economy, and let me just, I know this came across in the taxi industry when we had your conference in the Gold Coast. It is not a buzzword. I just want to put my point of view quite clearly. To me, the sharing economy, I want to explain it in these terms. Our existing traditional economy has the taxi industry with the technology platform joined by a service contract. So your service contract, your technology platform, and the customer are linked in that way. That is what we call a traditional economy. In a sharing economy, The technology platform is global. The taxi asset is separate, and the customers are separate. All our legislation is geared to the traditional economy. That is why, both in Queensland and in other parts of Australia, the enforcement of rules against companies like Uber are very difficult to do. So we're going to tackle that shared economy. So in answer to your question, which other industry is closest? Well, you've got Airbnb as a big operator globally and in this country. And you can see that even in that industry, the Victorian government at the moment is trying to regulate.
Yeah.
Now, that's a good example of a shared economy because Airbnb owns no hotels, no apartments, but it links the owners of those apartments to customers who want apartments and hotels. Very attractive. It doesn't pay GST because you don't pay GST on your principal place of residence or what you own. So they have an unfair advantage if you speak to the hotel owners and apartment owners who rent their properties. So in that sense, there is a similar analogy, but not every analogy is just that, it's an analogy.
You mentioned Victoria, and several states have moved in the transport industry to deregulate, to invite ride sharing. What have you picked up or dismissed from other states that you think is valuable for people to hear?
Well, in the green paper, we have actually gone through each state. I think what's valuable in other states is to listen to what they did less of that they should have done. And I think one thing we have done here, and that's illustrated in scenario 2, where we have recommended in that option that Southeast Queensland be separated from regional Queensland. I think if you speak to someone in New South Wales or Western Australia, they will tell you, they certainly told me, they will tell you that part of understanding regional Australia was not picked up in those reviews satisfactorily. And even some of the South Australians would tell you the same. I don't know what my colleagues here in this audience today would say, but that would be a good example of what we have learned. Scenario 2, as we've called it, would never appear in any other state paper.
Yes.
The other ones that we've picked up is that we have, in suggesting if you did go for scenario 2 or 3, we've suggested a separate license category. But in that, we've also said that a vehicle must have identification, right, number one. It can't just run around as a private car. It should have Uber or whatever on screen. It should have very similar characteristics to what we require on taxis, including the zero blood alcohol level. In New South Wales, for example, you can still drive an Uber vehicle and presumably in 0.044, whatever it is.
Would it require a license?
Well, I think 0.02 is New South Wales. So
No, I mean a taxi license, a regulation.
Yes, you do require a taxi license for rank and hail, but there is a separate provision for source riding.
All right, let's just go through those 4 in just a moment. One question before we do that. In 3 of your 4 options or recommendations, there is a change. What are you thinking in terms of industry transition and I guess possibly compensation?
Okay, there are a couple of issues there. All of those scenarios, they're not recommendations, they are scenarios which have merit. We will be, hopefully from this feedback and others, we'll be looking at what might be a workable solution or a recommendation. So what we're looking for in all of that is there 2 factors that underpin all the scenarios. One is that we are suggesting that the taxi industry be integrated with the public transport system. So we've used the concept of first and last mile. So you should be able to use your equivalent of your Go card to catch the nearest bus or the train. That's number one. That would have the effect of increasing utilization of taxis. That would be a very great step forward, not just for those that need taxis in that circumstance, but for the public transport system, but also for the income stream of taxi owners, taxi drivers, and of course with that, the value of the taxi license, which at the end of the day is determined also by your income stream. The second aspect of that is we've suggested there be an industry commissioner at a high level that reports to the minister and works with the Director General of TransLink, that actually works with the industry, much like our 1994 legislation had core regulation, so that that commissioner has the power to test the effectiveness of enforcement, compliance, studies of supply and demand, so that you effectively self-regulate to the changes that happen in the future.
Okay, so can I just get you to I'm going to swap you microphones, if that's okay.
So, let me now go to the compensation side.
It's on.
So in the paper, that's much better. In the paper, we have outlined what we call industry adjustment. So that what we're saying is that you're maintaining rank and hail. So there's some value of the license there, and we've cited New South Wales that does the 20,000 transitional allowance up to a number of licenses. That's a benchmark. It charges $1 a fare. Obviously, if we move in that direction, we would be looking at industry adjustment assistance if it's warranted and needed. The difference between the other states is they're not moving at all to look at first and last mile, for example, with taxis. They haven't moved to create a mechanism that allows the industry to move forward. I would see this industry commission has also been advised by an advisory group that would be the Taxi Council and other stakeholders.
Okay, we are going to come back to that compensation and industry transition question, because I think many of you will have a question about that. But just before we do that, can we just get really clear what the 4 scenarios are? So scenario 1, and there are boxes over on the side. If you didn't want to ask a question or you didn't want to make public a comment, please feel free. There's paper available to write your comment and put it in a specific box, or vote for the specific scenario you want to. But let's just go through the 4 scenarios briefly before opening it to your questions. And my understanding of the first scenario, there is no change, where the number of issued licenses are government controlled and are perpetual. That's right?
Yes, there's no change, but let me just say that there is still room for innovation and better customer service, right? And so I just wanted to make it clear that option 1 that's put in there is put in there on the basis that that option does meet the 5 guiding principles. Could be met better, but it does meet the 5 guiding principles. And it also, in that option, you could have innovation occurring. For example, I was mentioning just before this forum started that there's iHail that's coming to the market, and there's also Netcabs that's coming to the market. Netcab being quite an interesting counter to the Uber technology, which the South Australian government and the West Australian governments are looking into with the taxi industry. So I wouldn't like you to just see the first option as status quo full stop. It's status quo in an innovative context.
All right, only about maybe 15%. Can you just explain what you see it is and how it would operate?
I think Benjamin can explain it better than I can, because he looks at it. Let me give my perspective on what Netcab is. Sure. So I've only just reviewed it, and I've asked our people to really look at it very thoroughly, because you can get very good salesmen in this area. So you've got to be cautious of whatever's said to you. But what impressed me about Netcab is that if I have my smartphone with me, I can pick up a taxi, both rank and hail and booked. I can check that the said driver there is the driver that's appearing on my iPhone. I've got the fare details. When I'm sitting in the cab, even if my driver can't speak English properly, I've got it on my iPhone or whatever smartphone you've got, where I'm going, where I'm doing, shortest route. It has no surcharge at all on the phone. Well, I said even if they can't, I wasn't passing a value judgment on it, because there are some that can't speak fluent English, as you know. But it's a good or a bad thing, we've got tests for that. But I was just using that as a without prejudice statement to say the technology is there that assists the customer. It should be less hostile to the driver, I guess. So you know the route that you're going in. It also allows the Netcab or the operator to see real time where the journey is. Reporting can be accessed by both the police and TMI as required. And the other thing it does, it has facial recognition that recognizes driver fatigue, which is pretty innovative. And then it provides, as I understand it, Madonna, a capacity to rate both the customer and the driver.
So how would it practically change the operation of a licensed taxi operating, let's say, in Townsville?
Well, if something like Netcab was on the market, this is what I'm understanding is happening in South Australia, it would be no different from any taxi owner or driver here selecting a taxi operator that they want to. Netcab would be presumably the same as yellow cab or black and white cab. There'd be another operator.
Okay, so let's just move on to option 2 so I can get to your questions. Option 2 is Southeast Queensland is treated differently from the rest of the state, but only in terms of the booked market.
Yes, that's correct. So Southeast Queensland, we would be combining the taxi service areas, the TSAs. So that's essentially, you're looking at Brisbane, Gold Coast, the Redcliffe and Ipswich all combined. And the rest of the state is regional. So that's about 75% of all taxi licenses are in the Southeast Queensland, about 20 on TSAs that is, and 25% in regional Queensland.
And that means that outside that area, it would remain as it is.
Remain exactly as it is at the present time. That's correct.
At the present time, what do you mean by that? Could it change, and who would make that decision?
We have recommended that there be an industry commissioner that will work with. There may be no change, there may be some change. But what I would recommend to government is that you don't want a review like this every 2 or 3 years. You want a co-regulated environment where you have somebody in the industry at a high level can work with, and change becomes part of life rather than something imposed on you.
Yeah. Okay. So scenario 3 then deregulates it essentially across to Queensland.
Correct.
The booked market.
Correct. Scenario 3 is essentially what you have in New South Wales, what you have in the ACT, what you have in Western Australia and South Australia. That's essentially scenario 3, with one difference, in that in that scenario we would still require identification of the vehicle, which is not required in Sydney, and also require a blood alcohol level of 0, which is also not required in New South Wales. And also it is a special category license which we need to work through how that would work in a way that is fulfills the guiding principles.
All right. So, and then the final scenario is you remove entry restrictions, deregulate fares for both the rank and the hail market. So it's a free for all.
It's a free for all with a difference in that its essential thinking is that the market is in the best position to meet the demands and expectations, including the 5 guiding principles, but it recognises that the government has to set standards in relation to safety and also accessibility. And that could be done by way of how subsidies are directed, but essentially it is your most deregulated option.
Do you see risks in that option?
Yes, the risk in those options is always market failure, and that is, will the market in fact do that? Right. The economists, some economists, not all of them, some economists believe it will. Others are divided, and so government then has to pick up market failure. That would be its key risk. But there are ways of dealing with that risk, and that is that government has to, in the way it sets the standards and monitors it, it would then step in to take the appropriate action.
So my last question before opening to your questions and comments is, if these scenarios are down a football field, number 1's at one goal post and number 4's at the other goal post, I'm pushing you here, but is it fair to say you're playing more in the middle?
No, I'm actually honestly playing with where we believe our evidence has led us to, and that evidence has come to 4 scenarios. But I haven't been squeamish about it. I've said, for example, that in the option scenario 1, I was impressed that the guiding principles were satisfactorily there. I wouldn't say the same in other states. I think Queensland actually has a far more progressive taxi industry than I can observe.
But you did say an option one isn't as innovative as other options.
Yes, correct. That's what I said. Satisfactorily meets the guidelines.
Yes, okay.
So there's need there to look at more customer service and more innovation. And you know, I was yesterday at the World Business Forum in my other business hat, and I was hearing the CEO of NAB speak, and the CEO of NAB told his audience that the bank actually funds through their research labs and even acquisitions. They actually fund a company to attack the bank so that it can be better. So they actually run scenarios of how a predator would come in and try and.
No wonder our bank fees are so high.
So the banks are very, very aware of what's happening with disruptive technology. I understand that's also being done by a couple of other banks as well. It's a different way of looking at the world, I guess. Yeah. So I guess when you're looking at the existing system, while Queensland has great innovation in its industry, maybe take a look at looking at the banking example. Look at the competition as how can I improve stuff. There may be some merit in that.
All right, so let me now open it to you. We've got 2 microphones on either side. We are here for something like an hour and a half. Everyone will get their say. I ask that we just be polite and we let each person have their say or ask a question. So who'd like to go first? Thank you, Benjamin in the front, and then the Sir in the second last row. Thanks.
Thanks. Just by way of introduction for everyone else, I'm Benjamin Walsh, CEO from Taxi Council of Queensland. I noticed that the New South Wales, Victorian and ACT reviews all remove universal service obligations or dilute those universal service obligations on taxi service providers. Do you expect to recommend to government that we maintain universal service obligations here in Queensland?
Well, I think in the paper and in the guiding principles, I have retained it in there. You would notice in the green paper, and that will be one of the challenges as you move through the scenarios and how you maintain it.
Just as a quick follow-up, in options 2 and 3, how would you see maintaining universal service obligations while levelling the playing field and creating different categories? Because it seems that you can only really achieve the outcomes stated in options 2 and 3 by diluting or removing those universal service obligations, which are clearly in the public interest.
Yeah, and as you'll notice in the green paper, we've devoted 3 or 4 pages there on how you define the public interest and how you work through it. So the very notion of a special license category is actually behind that thinking, is actually to look at that particular guiding principle, which is the accessibility, and see how best the public interest can be maintained. And a big challenge in that will be, for example, wheelchair access taxis and its provision. I think in regional Queensland it's actually higher. The percentage, I think, is 22% of wheelchair access taxis in regional Queensland. I think about 18% in Southeast. On the figures that I have here, that's in the green paper. So Benjamin, that's would be the first part of your answer. We've got to work through that detail and see how we can best meet the first of those guiding principles, and then, of course, the other 4. I don't want to just have 4 principles. I want all 5 of them ticked off.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's John Baveo. I'm a taxi owner operator here in Townsville, mum and dad operator. I want to know why there has to be a different class of licence, considering the share riding model can operate as we do 24/7, and also why, there is no advantage in us having Hales and rank work, because they do hails and rank work themselves. They make their own ranks, which has been proven in Brisbane. So really the hail and ranks is no real advantage to us at all. So we're not getting any benefit at all.
Well, I think the point you've made here in Townsville, I've picked up in our second scenario, where we don't see that right sourcing here would do anything to keep the sustainability of your business, the separation. But that's why we said it remains as is. If you went statewide, which is really your question, and you separated them, the idea of right sourcing is to create a licensed category that allows more supply to customers, to give them more choice. Particularly the younger from 18 to about 25 are very keen on that sort of a choice, which Uber represents one, Go Catch another, Lyft if it comes back into the market another. So that's part of, I guess, customer choice and innovation. And I've recognized exactly what you've said in scenario 2, where we suggest no changes in Townsville.
Thank you. Who's got another question? Well, don't be shy. Yes, sir. We'll just wait to get the microphone so everyone can hear. No, just wait for the microphone. Just one toe. And anyone else with one, put your hand up. We'll get the next microphone to you too. Thank you.
Right. You say you're in the city, it's all up and going, but in the country it'll be no Uber. But you can't control it now, so how are you going to stop it?
That's, can I just say, underpinning every scenario that I have put in this paper that we have.
Actually, nothing done to stop Uber, even though it's illegal. And you're saying the government's going to make a decision on this after this green paper. How can you trust it?
Okay, well, there's two different issues. I'm not the government, number one. I'm an independent.
No, but still the answer's got, the question's got to be answered.
Well, let me answer you.
Let me answer the question. Thank you.
And it's a fair question. It's a fair question. I've said at the very outset of this review that the laws of Queensland must be upheld. There's no excuse for not doing it. I'm on the record. I've said it since October. Now, the government has moved legislation to increase the fines on illegal Uber drivers, and that is the subject currently. I understand of, I think I'm advised that 68 drivers are appealing that sentence, that fine in the courts. So that's happening as we speak. The government has moved to do that change. The fundamental issue, though, that the government does face, and we would want the government to address, because whatever scenario is adopted, you cannot have a situation where a company can turn around and say, I don't care about your rules, we will just disobey it and we'll pay the fines. That's just not on. So, I mentioned when I started the questions that Madonna asked me, that we are in a sharing economy as opposed to a traditional economy. Our legislation, in my view, is inadequate to deal with the current scenario. We need legislation that's able to address an international company that is a technology platform that links assets like cars to customers. And if they breach the standards and guidelines that we put out, they should be brought to task, and should be brought to task quickly. So I would see, and I would certainly be suggesting to government that there be much more high-tech enforcement and compliance. They should use algorithms, for example, for enforcement. They should have access to databases, more sophisticated technology for enforcement, and it should be regularly oversighted by this industry commissioner to make sure that the legislation is effective in doing the job that it's supposed to do.
Now, can I go back to you? Does that answer your question?
Not really, because nothing's been done to stop them.
No, but now that you would agree that compliance now has not been good.
I think the compliance, well, my view is that the compliance needs more effective legislation to support it. The government has it changed the legislation. I think Benjamin might want to comment on it. It's changed the legislation to get much better enforcement. But it's not my, my job is not to pass judgment on trains length and their enforcement. But I think I've answered your question fairly.
So can I just go to Benjamin on that though? Thanks, Benjamin.
That's on.
Yeah.
But just a couple of things. As you'd be aware, we managed to get a bill through the Katter Party onto the floor of the Parliament, and it didn't actually deliver the reforms we exactly wanted. But I think it's important to note that one of the things that it did deliver was bipartisan support and passage through the Parliament. And there's no question in the mind of any of the parliamentarians that the behaviours that we're seeing currently are illegal. Now, there's one thing to get legislation through, and there's another thing to have the political will to pursue and enforce that legislation. There was some token efforts in that first couple of weeks. I think it was a bit of a bounce back. We pushed very hard to make sure that the government actually upheld the new enforcement regime, but for whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be the political will to see these sort of activities really stand out. And there's no evidence here or anywhere in the world that you can do anything that's going to actually stop this kind of miscreant behaviour. So from that point of view, I'm not certain that there is any recommendation that the government can take that they're going to be able to enforce, because you've got a company who is so well funded they can simply pay their way through as an operating cost non-compliance with whatever regime is operated. I mean, there's been no jurisdiction in the world where they've been accommodated and they've played by the rules. They just turn around and say, well, we'll do this if it suits us, we won't do that if it doesn't suit us, and we've got enough money to pay the difference.
Well, I said ages ago, a year ago, why did the government take the app off the air and then get this thing sorted out?
It's probably not possible for a government to remove an app
They
though.
know if it's something immoral or anything like that.
I think they're struggling with those too. But
Yeah. No, I don't think government can do that. But let me just say something which I think I don't quite share the same view as Benjamin in terms of what government can do. I think, for example, I was formerly in a previous life head of primary industries and fisheries. In biosecurity, and you know this up in the northern end, you either kill citrus canker completely, right? Or there is no ifs and buts. And if somebody brought in from China or elsewhere a virus that threatened the primary producers of the state, we would move heaven and hell to put them behind the bars and find them. Right? So I don't see this as any different if you're looking at a previous hat. We had equine influenza, same thing. You bring an infected horse and destroy the horsing industry. We're equine and influenza free. So when you're looking at it in that perspective, I believe government, if it takes legislation that looks at a shared economy, has high tech in it, I think there will be the will to do something about it, and we will be, I think, positively. I think government has to do something in enforcement and compliance, and that is why I've also suggested there be an industry commission at a high level to look to make sure this happens, to work with industry. You cannot have rules that are not accepted or followed.
okay, I'm going to pull you up there so we can go to the next one. I've got one question here and another three over here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Angela Reeders. I'm from Townsville Taxis, the booking company for Townsville. In all your other three scenarios, besides the first one, you actually mentioned that the taxis will not have to be affiliated to a booking company. At the moment, we can prove, our data has proven, that we have our service levels that are provided to government. We adhere to them. We provide it with no argument. We are delivering an excellent service, as you yourself have admitted. With the booking company, we actually have an obligation to our area and to government that we deliver these services. We also have an obligation to the drivers and to the passengers to provide the safety and the service level as they expect. You have actually suggested that the taxis will not need to be affiliated to a booking company. How do you anticipate controlling those as they're your major guiding principles, how are you going to make sure that those standards are met and delivered correctly? We have had an example here before I carry on, in Magnetic Island, where we had only 3 cars, but being dispatched from 2 different booking companies. The customers out there were suffering badly. They would not get a taxi because they would presume the other taxi would pick it up, and eventually it was absolute chaos. And there was only 3 taxis in a very small area. I would like to know how you would anticipate trying to deliver those excellence in service without a booking company.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer that 2 ways. One is that the suggestion for no compulsory, it's not compulsory, we're not saying you don't use booking companies, they won't be compulsory. Government would still mandate exactly what we're currently mandating through standards. In regional Queensland, you don't have the same economies of scale as you would in Southeast Queensland, where numbers of drivers and owner-drivers have said to me they would like the option of having to take a booking company of their choice if they wish to. Now, I accept that in regional Queensland that condition may be different, which is why we put up scenario 2, which would cover your situation. So we're not saying there shouldn't be any booking companies, far from it. What we're saying is that it would be healthy to have some competition in there, and that competition could be, could be a net cab, it could be anything. But the benefits that you say are there, and I'm sure all your taxi owners, taxi drivers would move to take up those benefits, irrespective of whether it was mandatory or voluntary, because the benefits are good. So in scenario 2, there is no change. So your system will operate as it is. In scenario 3, it is not compulsory.
Thank you. Our next question over here.
Gavin Singh, I'm a taxi licence owner. My question was pretty well similar to the past gentleman's, but I'll take that a step further in terms of regulation and enforcement. Are you aware of a Uber driver in Victoria that has successfully appealed an infringement notice and awarded costs? And if so, what are the ramifications of that?
Yes, I am aware of that case. There are 2 sides to that case, and Benjamin may want to comment on that as well, because I'm sure you've looked at that case as well. But from where I'm sitting, the media has reported that case as saying that it's legalised, effectively legalised Uber in Victoria. And I'm advised that's in fact not the case. What it is a case on particular technicalities that weren't appropriately pursued by our equivalent of TransLink in the courts, and that Victoria still has got to make a decision, just as Queensland does, on what it does on ride sourcing. The Victorian government's view is that case has not legalised Uber in the state, because the circumstances of that particular case are not applicable to a statewide decision. And we'll have to get our legal people to have a look at it and study it. But what that does tell you is exactly what Benjamin was saying before, that if you've got the money to pay the fines and you keep appealing and appealing, at some point, you're going to get some wins that are then marketed, and at some points, given the funding you have, you'll just continue to do that process right up until the Supreme Court or High Court. And in fact, I haven't seen the final ruling on the High Court GST case. I think that's still in progress on GST, and that's a far more important one for the states and the Australian government to look at in terms of disruptive technology and what a company does in relation to payment of GST in this country. So to answer your question, yes, we are aware of that case. 2, I think the media interpretation of that case is not my understanding that it has changed the legality of Uber driving in Victoria.
Just before our next question over there, just to sum up here, are you confident that if the government changed the laws, that whatever you recommend, compliance would follow? Are you confident of that?
if the recommendations are adopted, if the recommendations are adopted as presented, and that includes an industry commissioner,
Yeah.
right? So you've got a body in there at a high level where the industry can say, hang on, what's happening in here? I'll give you a simple example. Let's say I've had a problem with a technology disruptor, and I've put an enforcement notice. The tendency is, if I've lost it at a magistrate's court level, you might not appeal it.
Yeah.
I would insist that it be appealed right up until the Supreme Court, because you actually find, and I certainly found this with regulations in biosecurity, when it's challenged at a magistrate's court, appeal it, because in the end you'll get better legislation, and if the legislation needs to be changed, then the government recalls Parliament and changes the legislation. So I would see in that circumstance that a determined support for the legislation, which would include, if it loses at a lower court level, it'll continue to appeal till it find out what the defect is. We'll make sure it's watertight. What do you think, Benjamin?
That absolutely reflects the view of Taxi Council in terms of, we think one of the things that this whole situation's highlighted is the incapacity of the department as it's currently structured to effectively deal with emerging issues. If you have a better commission, what should have happened is when the first cease and desist went out, the first fine was issued. If it was challenged, they should have just been prosecuted. They should have been taken very quickly to the courts, because if there's deficiency in the legislation, then a court ruling will find that out. The power of the Parliament is to be able to go and change legislation quickly to tighten it. So the problem is everyone's been pointing in different directions, and that's what happens with a central agency. No one wants to step up and take responsibility. Everyone wants to hide in the foxhole. So we're very much supportive of the idea of an independent commission that reports through, has strong industry engagement and the ability to very quickly ramp up prosecutions and make legislative changes if need be, and get the outcome, because you can't have this ongoing illegal activity. It needs to be nipped in the bud, and a central agency, I just think, can't do that.
All right, thank you, Benjamin. 2 questions over there and back over here. Thank you.
I'm Kevin Doobie, taxi operator in Townsville. Just another couple of questions. At present, in the interest of public safety, taxi dispatch systems control the amount of hours that drivers can drive. How is that going to be controlled through share riding companies? The other is we are required to have bailment agreements with the drivers. And from what I read in the paper, a lot of the Uber drivers are not happy with what's happened there. How is driver equality going to be controlled here?
Okay, I'll answer those in 2 ways. Let's take the safety issue first. If you were to move to scenario 2 or 3 in ride sourcing, and I'm not saying we are, but if we were, then we would insist that the same rules apply on driver fatigue. With some of the software that I've now seen, including one we've just talked about with Netcab, where not only does it give you the personal identity of the driver, but can actually read whether you're fatigued or not. I believe there's very sophisticated technology in place that can monitor the driver fatigue very effectively. So that's number one in relation to your first question. In relation to your second question, which is the bail-or-bailee agreement, I have received representations from the Uber Drivers Association. I think there's some 4,000 of them that are concerned about the wages, about what they would receive as part of a bailee arrangement, and that is something that we would have to look at. But I'm not very keen to get into the area of whether it's a bail or bailee agreement or an employer-employee relationship. I think I've accepted that it is a bail or bailee arrangement, that effectively you are small businessmen and that you negotiate a fare, and that we would be looking to obviously to ensure that the industry is sustainable, and if it's not sustainable, then you do have an industry commissioner in there that can look at it.
Thank you. The next question also on that side. Thanks, Steph.
My name's Bob Doyle. My wife's got the Acacia limousines in Townsville, and currently we've sort of been the only company in Townsville for quite a while. I'm also a member of the Katter Party, which we've mentioned just a while ago, and with reference to legislation is needed to control the happenings. We've got a meeting tonight with our member who's going to stand against Ewan Jones, and it's at the Holding family on the corner of Hugh and Palmerston Street at the church there. Now, if any discussion has come up with reference to what you've got there, we'd like as many people to come, because we can push both Bob, Robbie Katter and Shane Knuth to get these legislations through government. Now, I'm not going to talk politics there, but with reference to the compliance, most of us are compliant. We've got the licence, the current authority to drive our vehicles, but then you've got other people that are operating in Townsville, operating with vehicles over a period of time with a special licence, and they're not compliant. The point I'm getting on this is the possibilities of liability. Liability with these people is, until somebody has an accident, nobody's going to realise that they need liability. So why don't we push in that area there to get rid of them? Thank you.
Yes, I have met with Robbie Carter, just for the record. So I've taken him through these both scenarios. In relation to your question, we are looking at CTP and how that might work. One option on CTP is what's called a floating CTP. So if you only drive a car for a part of the time, then you'd pay part of the insurance premium. So we're looking at that. We don't know how that'll pan out. That's run by the insurance specialists. But your issue of compliance, if there are rules, they must be followed, and you're saying they're not. And if they're not, there's certainly an issue of liability there. And I believe there's still an issue of liability which is yet to be tested with Uber drivers. If in fact they do cause insurance issues of liability, we don't actually have a court case that I'm aware of that tells us whether in fact Uber has picked up the liability. So I think that's a fair issue. It's mentioned in our green paper, and we'll certainly be looking at it pretty closely.
Thank you, sir. And thanks for your patience. We will get to you all.
How you going? It's Mick Thatcher. I own and operate Camden Charters Towers, one of the regional centres, about 120 k's from here. Not really wanting to go cross back over old ground, but I still think, and I've raised this in a number of forums, but we seem to be chasing our tails and penalising the Uber drivers. Why aren't we sort of cutting off the head of the snake? Wouldn't it be a lot easier through our court system if somebody's aiding and abetting to carry out illegal activities? Because it's been stated by this chair, plus TMR, plus our government and politicians, that it is illegal. So why aren't we chasing the people that actually put the service in the forum to let the individuals of the state to use it? Wouldn't it be so much easier?
Charge the customers.
No. The people supplying the app. You know, because if they're doing something illegal, they're supplying an app that is enable people, like drivers, to carry on an illegal activity. Surely it'd be easier to chase after that one individual than trying to slap all the other individual drivers with fines that are going to be paid. As the chair was saying earlier, we need the legislation, and as Ben was also saying, we need the legislation in place. But having legislation in place where you're going to try and chase 1,000 or 1,500 drivers, wouldn't it be easier to chase one?
So I'm not quite clear what the question is.
That the app would be illegal and those supplying the app would then be charged.
That's correct.
But can I just jump in there in a sense? Facebook is illegal for anyone under 14. Yeah. But there is no way that a government could ever charge Facebook for my child getting on it when they're 10. Now, I think the international borders of the app is the problem there.
No, I think you're missing the point slightly. We all know that the app, the process of these share riding drivers is illegal in Queensland. Now, they could not carry out their illegal activity if they didn't have the support, the technology support from Uber. So if that was deemed to be illegal, that you're assisting people in Queensland to carry out illegal activities, that then should be stopped.
Well, I think you're dealing here with trans-border issues, and the state of Queensland has already jurisdiction within its state boundaries. The app you're referring to is not only cross